I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore, and this is Newsday. The headlines. More tensions between the president and the FBI. Donald Trump is set to approve the release of a memo that accuses the agency of bias against him. The reality of life in China's Xinjiang province. Our reporter finds out what it's like to live under a huge security operation.
China is building a total surveillance state. It's a place where saying, doing, or even thinking can get you locked up in an internment camp.
I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Also in this programme, scientists say they've developed an early warning test for Alzheimer's, but with no cure. Should people be told if they're at risk of the disease? And a warning from England's Chief Inspector of Schools. Some parents and religious leaders are trying to actively pervert education.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Glad you could join us. It's 9 in the morning here in Singapore, 1 a.m. in London, and 8 in the evening in Washington, D.C., where the seat of the U.S. government is buzzing with anticipation about the controversial memo about the FBI. It is understood that the report, which is thought to claim the agency effectively spied on one of Donald Trump's staff during the presidential campaign, will be made public on Friday. The FBI is understood to preparing an extremely rare public rebuttal. The final say on the publication remains with Mr. Trump. He has remained tight-lipped, even when reporters were shouting questions at him as he left the White House.
The FBI has raised concerns about the memo. Why are you at war with the FBI?
At the heart of the memo is understood to be the claim that the FBI was working in a way which favored the Democrats. Senior Democrat Adam Schiff says he's worried the Republicans are trying to engineer a way of weakening the Robert Mueller investigation into alleged Russian interference in the presidential election.
Firing Rod Rosenstein or firing Bob Mueller would be an act of obstruction of justice that will bring down this administration. Don't go there. But instead what they're doing is saying the FBI is corrupt, the department is corrupt, and if you fire anybody, we're going to roll over.
Senior Democrat Adam Schiff. Well, to find out about what we can expect in the memo, we spoke to the BBC's Peter Bowes in Los Angeles.
We believe that this memo essentially accuses the FBI of abusing its surveillance powers. Now, specifically, the allegation is that the FBI and the Department of Justice misled a judge last March when they went to that judge to extend a surveillance warrant against one of Donald Trump's foreign advisors that worked for him during the election, Carter Page. Now, what they allegedly didn't tell the judge was that the justification for extending that warrant, that surveillance warrant, essentially a TAP warrant, was that the information to justify it came from the now famous Trump dossier of information that was partially funded by the Democrats.
Now, Peter, this is inevitably getting political, with the Democrats now accusing the White House of using this to justify the firing of Robert Mueller, who, of course, we were speaking about that Russia investigation is really overhanging the Trump administration.
Yes, the Democrats are essentially saying that this is a ruse to discredit the entire Russia investigation. Now, we understand, certainly from some US media reports, that Donald Trump has been telling friends that he believes the release of this memo would help him in terms of that investigation. But as you say, it could potentially give the White House some justification for firing the man who is in charge of that investigation. There's still a long way to go. It looks like the president will essentially declassify the memo. It'll then go back to Congress, and we understand that during the next 24 hours we'll get to see the fine detail.
And of course, when we get the fine detail, we'll bring that to you. Peter Bowes there in Los Angeles. Now, let's take a look at some of the day's other news stories. President Putin has welcomed a decision to overturn lifetime doping bans on 28 Russian athletes who'd competed at the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi. Sports Top Court said that there was insufficient evidence to prove doping. The decision means that the athletes could take legal action against the International Olympic Committee. Russia is already proposing that they be entered for the Winter Games in South Korea. Here's what the IOC had to say.
This may have a serious impact on the future fight against doping. Therefore, the IOC will analyse the reasoned decisions very carefully once they are available and consider consequences, including an appeal to the Swiss Federal Tribunal.
Well, also making news today, US lawmakers have nominated Hong Kong pro-democracy activists, including their 21-year-old leader, Joshua Wong, for the Nobel Peace Prize. He was nominated alongside Alex Chow and Nathan Law for peaceful efforts to bring political reform and self-determination to Hong Kong. The move is likely to anger Beijing. The pro-democracy umbrella movement brought parts of central Hong Kong to a standstill for nearly 3 months in mid-2014. The Maldives Supreme Court has overturned the terrorism conviction of the exiled former president Mohamed Nasheed, seen here in London back in 2016, and ordered the immediate release of a number of high-profile political prisoners. The court ruled that the 9 politicians and former officials had been jailed as a result of the trials which had been subject to political pressure. In the latest school shooting in the United States, 2 teenage pupils have been shot and wounded. Police have taken a 12-year-old girl into custody after the incident in central Los Angeles. The 2 victims, a boy and a girl, both of whom are aged 15, are both expected to survive. There have been violent clashes between migrants in the French port of Calais. 18 people are reported to have been injured in a series of fights between Afghans and Africans living rough in and around the town. 4 Eritreans who were hit by gunfire are reported to be in a very serious condition in hospital. The US State Department says it is deeply troubled by new reports of mass graves in Myanmar's Rakhine State, where the military has been accused of atrocities against minority Rohingya Muslims. Authorities in Myanmar say that they will investigate the report of mass graves containing the bodies of as many as 400 Rohingya Muslims. Police in the US say that the actor Robert Wagner is now being treated as a person of interest in an investigation into the death of his wife. The Hollywood star Natalie Wood was found dead in the water off the coast of California after she went missing from her family yacht in 1981. Well, in interviews for CBS News, detectives investigating the case say that they have uncovered new evidence. Now, these little creatures are among 500 illegally trafficked finches that have been rescued in Peru. They were being transported by bus from the south of the country without authorization. Now, very sadly, at least half of them died, and the rest of them have been suffering from dehydration, and they were very, very hungry. Now, suspects have reportedly been arrested. The birds will eventually be released back into their natural habitat once they are back to their full health.
British Prime Minister Theresa May is on the 3rd and final day of her visit to China and is due to address the Shanghai Business Forum over the next few hours. She's agreed to a joint trade and investment review with Beijing as a first step towards an ambitious post-Brexit deal. President Xi Jinping said China's markets would be further open to the UK, including in dairy, beef and other food products. The 2 leaders also discussed North Korea, protecting the environment and human rights. Earlier I spoke to our Beijing correspondent Stephen McDonald and I asked him the outcome of the meeting between the 2 leaders.
I should say off the bat, Rico, something that our viewers in mainland China will already know, that some of our coverage of Theresa May's trip to China is now being censored. Now, a few hours ago I was asking the question on air as to whether or not Theresa May could be raising with Xi Jinping human rights allegations in Tibet and Xinjiang regions. Screen goes to black. And we know now from the readout of that meeting that there was discussions about human rights. In fact, that the British Prime Minister raised Hong Kong with Xi Jinping. Now, I don't think this will go down too well with the Chinese government, but she was asking about the erosion of freedoms there, and especially the implementation of the so-called one country, two systems model, whereby Hong Kong is supposed to have certain freedoms guaranteed, and many people who are living there see it as being eroded away.
Third and final day of her trip to China, which has taken her to Wuhan, Shanghai, and now Beijing. How successful has it been?
Yes, well, I think, you know, if we talk about trade, normally we're welcoming back our viewers in mainland China. I think the China and British governments would both say it's been a successful trip. You know, they're both talking up the long-term projections of the economic relationship between these two countries post-Brexit.
Steve McDonald there in Beijing. Well, while China is often seen as a prized country with which to trade, the nations which strike deals with Beijing are also confronted with what to do about China's stance on human rights. Well, one area which is particularly attracting attention is the province of Xinjiang in the far west of China and home to many Muslims. It's also seen violent clashes with the security forces, and China has now greatly increased its security measures there. Our China correspondent John Sudworth and his team travelled to Xinjiang, where all filming and reporting by foreign media is tightly controlled. Here's his report.
In looks and in distance, it's closer to Baghdad than Beijing. But this is China, its far western province of Xinjiang, and now the target of one of the world's most intense security crackdowns. The Uyghurs, a mainly Muslim minority, have a long history here. Today, fear is everywhere. Under the watchful eye of government minders, there's only ever one correct answer. I know nothing, he tells me. Life is good here. Moments later, police show up. This is the China visiting prime ministers never get to see. Police power here is all-pervasive and growing. Millions of residents are being forced to give DNA samples. Mobile phones are searched for sensitive religious content using handheld plug-in devices. And for those suspected of even the mildest disloyalty to Beijing, there's now a network of secretive detention camps in which thousands of Uyghurs have been locked up without trial. Close to what we believe is one of them, we're stopped from filming. China is building a total surveillance state. It's a place where saying, doing, or even thinking the wrong thing can get you locked up in an internment camp. And as you can see, it's a place where foreign journalists are certainly not welcome. Wherever we go in Xinjiang, we're constantly hassled, detained, monitored, and followed. Like thousands of Uyghurs, Abdurrahman Hassan has fled to Turkey. He thought his wife and mother would be safe at home. He's since heard, he says, that they've been taken to the camps.
From early morning till late evening, she's only allowed to sit on a hard chair. My poor mother has to endure this punishment every day. My wife's only crime was to be born a Uyghur, and because of that, she lives in a re-education camp where she has to sleep on the ground. I don't know whether they are alive or dead. I can't bear it anymore. I would rather they were executed than abused to death by the Chinese government.
He says he has no idea what's happened to his children. Today, the British government raised its concerns about the treatment of Muslims here, including restrictions on religious practice. Such a frank statement in the middle of a prime ministerial visit will not go down well. China is seeking the UK's backing for a plan to use Xinjiang's desert highways as a new economic corridor to Central Asia and beyond. It insists the threat of Islamic terrorism, with a number of attacks in recent years, is a real one. Can I ask you some questions? Is it difficult to answer questions? But a police state breeds fear. They're busy, they say. And can stoke the very resentments China says it's trying to stamp out. John Sudworth, BBC News, Xinjiang.
You're watching Newsday on the BBC, live from Singapore and London. Still to come on the program. We hear from a scientist who has developed an early warning test for Alzheimer's.
Also coming up on the program, the broadcast show, which packs a punch, will reveal why tempers got just a little frayed in this Russian studio.
Welcome back, everyone. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore.
And I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Our top stories this hour. Donald Trump is set to approve the release of a Republican memo that accuses the FBI of bias against him.
President Vladimir Putin has welcomed a decision to overturn lifetime doping bans on 28 Russian athletes who had competed at the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi. Let's now take a look at some of the front pages from around the world, and we start off with the international edition of the Japan Times, and it reports on an apartment fire in Sapporo, which killed 11 people and left 3 injured. Most of the victims of the blaze were elderly residents who lived on welfare. The incident has given rise to a debate about poor fire prevention for people with low incomes. Shifting our attention to the Straits Times of Singapore, and it leads with pictures of Cape Town's reservoir running dry. After 3 years of low rainfall, the severe drought is threatening water supplies for residents, businesses, and the tourism industry. And finally, the China Daily takes on the subject of rail expansion to make travel for passengers even smoother. 3 new railways are expected to relieve pressure on China's transportation networks during the upcoming Spring Festival. And those are the top stories of key publications around the world. And currently trending, Kasia, is a major fight inside a radio studio.
Oh, of course it is, Rico. What else is going to be trending? Brilliant pictures, an example of what can happen when a radio debate just gets that little bit too heated. Now, what you're looking at is a webcam feed from Russia's Komsomolskaya Pravda radio station. And there you go. A debate going very wrong. They were actually debating the former Soviet leader Stalin, and, well, the disagreement led to blows. Fortunately, the very professional staff managed to get matters under hand, but Rico, I'm very pleased our guests don't behave this way on Newsday.
Would you want to know if you were likely to develop Alzheimer's? Well, Australian and Japanese scientists have developed a blood test that has the potential to identify early indicators of the dementia disease before people even show any noticeable symptoms. Trials on nearly 400 people showed the blood test for a toxic protein linked to the disease is more than 90% accurate. Early detection is important as treatment can slow the rate of further decline. To find out more about this development, I spoke earlier to Professor Colin Masters, one of the lead researchers of this study.
It's a good feeling. We've been vindicated in this long search for a very robust blood test that works very efficiently.
And you tested this on close to 400 people. What is their age group?
Most of these people are in their mid-70s.
And of course, this is a major development, Mr. Masters, but it is still in the early stages. So where do you see it going from now, and how will it change medicine?
Well, this blood test needs to be still worked up so that it can be applied to many people. This will happen, we think, within the coming year. By the end of this year, we would expect the blood test to be available for the pharmaceutical industry to help in their recruitment of subjects for prevention studies.
This test predicts, Mr. Masters, Alzheimer's, but it doesn't treat it.
No, absolutely not. Today, we still don't have an effective treatment for Alzheimer's disease, but the industry is working very hard on this, and there are very promising signs of drugs in development, which we think will do the trick.
And absolutely do the trick. And how do you think, Mr. Masters, will this test help other researchers develop therapies to deal with the treatment?
Well, the first step in treatment discoveries is to be able to diagnose specifically. And this test shows all the characteristics of being able to do that. So we need to pick up people at a very early stage before the onset of any symptoms.
Professor Masters there describing that fascinating discovery to Rico. Now here in England, the Chief Inspector of Schools has warned that some parents and religious leaders are trying to actively pervert education. Amanda Spielman says that inspectors from the school's watchdog Ofsted are worried about some people using faith to try to narrow children's horizons and that they mustn't be allowed to dictate school policy on dress or behaviour. Seema Katecha reports from Birmingham.
Just wrap it around like a normal scarf.
These teenage Muslim girls have been wearing a headscarf for a few years now. Their reasons are varied.
This is one way I feel modest because I'm not showing off my hair or worrying about my makeup or whatever.
People who see me, they instantly recognise me as a Muslim, and also if I see other people, then I know that they're Muslim if they're wearing a hijab.
But in recent weeks, there's been a row over whether schools should be allowed to wear the hijab. In London, the head teacher of St Stephen's Primary School was heavily criticised for banning girls under the age of 8 from wearing it. She then reversed her decision because of the uproar. Now Ofsted has intervened. Today, its chief inspector said school leaders must have the right to set uniform policies in order to promote cohesion.
For some, wearing hijab post-puberty is seen as a religious requirement. There's a difference between that and cultural preferences, and wearing lipstick and high heels might be one of those. We don't say that all schools must respect cultural preferences, and we try and find a balance that makes a school a community for everybody in it.
The Quran, the holy book of Islam, says women should guard their modesty. The text is open to interpretation. Some Muslim women choose to wear it, others don't. But there are strong feelings around whether young girls should be allowed to cover up in schools.
Here in Birmingham, it's not uncommon to see girls who are 4 and 5 wearing the hijab with their uniform. Critics say that if its purpose is to guard modesty, it should only be worn after puberty. If not, Ofsted says that it could be interpreted as the sexualisation of young girls.
In all of our lives and all of our cultures.
At one school here, the head teacher is calling for more debate.
It's not an equal practice. Girls wear a headscarf or are expected to, or they can, or when they hit puberty, but boys are not. So it's not an equal practice, and you can't say that it is. So you have to be able to expect to have a really clear and open debate about these kind of things.
Some here argue banning the hijab could itself undermine the right to religious freedom. One mother says sometimes daughters just want to imitate their elders.
Children can be quite stubborn and fixed in their way. Then, you know, what can you do? Rather than have tantrums, you have to just sometimes give in. But if they want to do it, and, you know, and the school doesn't have any objections, then I don't have a problem with it, with them wearing it.
In cosmopolitan Britain, where different faiths come into contact with Western views, rules in schools can provoke controversy, anger and resentment. Seema Katecha, BBC News.
And you've been watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore. Have a great weekend, everyone. We'll see you again on Monday. Stay with us. Brace yourself for a tech earnings avalanche. Apple, Alibaba and Alphabet have all just reported their results. We'll be taking a look at their books.
Oh, great stuff, Rico. And actually on Monday it'll be Sharon-Jeet here in London, so we're looking forward to that. Now we're going to leave you in France. Let's take you to France for our final images, because we've been talking about the flooding in Paris all week. For most people it's been pretty bad in the French capital, but this teenager in a suburb decided to take advantage of it, and as you can see, he performed some impressive moves on this. This is what's known as a wakeboard, or well, it's rather a surfboard, but a little bit jazzier. It's towed by a motorboat outside his own family home. Well, at least someone is enjoying the bad weather and the flooding in Paris. From me in London, from Rico in Singapore. Thanks for watching Newsday. Bye-bye.